another aspect of being a good birder is being a good birder to others, and encouraging others, not putting other people down, because birding can be very competitive at times and very egotistic. I think there's a lot of people in birding who just sort of, they're just very straight or narrow-minded. But I think there can be so much gained from encouraging other people and birding as a community, sort of fostering that kind of birding community, and just making it a good place for everyone. Because at the end of the day, that just means there's more people out there looking, and they're going to see more things, and that's a win-win for everyone. So.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Birding Today podcast, where birders come together to discuss the joy of birding. I'm your host, Guillaume Doerig. Today's guest has been an obsessive birder since the age of 12. He has followed that obsession through high school and has birded across Australia, and has even ventured overseas as well. He has a very strong connection to Australian birds, especially those of the central west woodlands of southeastern Australia, which has led him to working on conservation projects to protect threatened woodland species, particularly the Regent Honeyeater. His overseas birding exploits turned into a job in 2019, as he began working for Victor Emanuel Nature Tours, taking clients birding abroad and in Australia. During the pandemic, he has focused on listing at LGA and state levels, and enjoying a tree change to rural New South Wales from Sydney, where he grew up. So please welcome Max Breckenridge. How are you going, Max?
Very good, mate. Good to be here.
Thanks for the time. I'm looking forward to this. A lot to talk about. But first, as listeners will know, the first question I ask to guests is, what brings you joy in birding?
Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, all birding brings me joy. I think, there's very few aspects of birding that I don't find enjoyment from. It's probably the thing in life that brings me the most joy. But yeah, I mean, I feel like although I do like showing other people birds, taking out people and just letting them get to see a bit of the world and the birds in it, that's really special. I find sometimes birding on my own, just being in the moment and just sort of being able to sort of just stand there for like 20 minutes or whatever in the bush or something and just listening to what's going on. I just find that really restorative and really enjoyable. So that's probably what I enjoy most when I'm out birding, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The solo birding is so important. If the joy you get when you're alone in the environment is hard to beat. Absolutely.
And just seeing things, that yeah, you might see with other people. There's nothing to say you wouldn't, but just I feel like sometimes when you're on your own, it's just a little bit more special even. I don't know. I mean, people disagree probably, but yeah, it's just nice finding those, even just not necessarily even birds, but being out in nature and seeing something you've never seen before, and just being able to sort of be like, oh, well, I'm the only person here just witnessing this amazing thing. Yeah, that brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're on your own, you can kind of do whatever you want and spend as much time as you want in a particular spot or not. You can move on, and that is a big part of it. Absolutely. And
yeah, there's no constraints. Yeah.
Yeah, no constraints. And when you're on your own, you're quieter as well. So that's another thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the whole thing with guiding and taking, well, you're not necessarily guiding, but yeah, you just inevitably see a bit more, I think, when you're on your own. Obviously, I find when you're birding out with a couple of good, a couple of friends or a couple of good birders, you do end up seeing more just because more eyes, more ears. But yeah, there's definitely a core sort of number, a good number of how many people can be out at one time, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm looking forward to getting to that as well later in the episode about the guiding. But for now, I'm interested in, so you say that you started birding when you were 12 years old. How did that come about? Was there a specific moment that kind of enthralled you, or was it gradual?
Yeah, it was sort of, I guess it was gradual, but also there was a very defined moment to it. I'd always, as a kid, just, been interested in nature and had supportive parents and, went on bushwalks and things like that. But I'd never been focused on any particular animal. And then, in year 6, when I was about 12, my parents took me and my brother out of school for 10 weeks, and we did a road trip around Australia, just camping the
Wow.
whole week. Yeah, it was pretty lucky, pretty awesome experience as a kid. And I just happened to have a pair of binoculars, and I think my grandma even gave me a copy of Slater's Field Guide to Birds just before that trip. All sort of coincidental things. And then, I just, for some reason, just got obsessed with, flicking through the book as we were driving those long drives, and then like, oh, I want to see this and that. Actually meeting a few birders just incidentally along the way who were very supportive, and then it was really just downhill from there, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's so good to kind of to track the path that you've taken in birding. That's always nice to do as a birder. And so you grew up in Sydney, which is quite obviously an urban setting. Did you do a lot of urban birding? When you were at school, after school, how did that work?
Yeah, well, that was sort of the thing. Like, as soon as I sort of, came back from this trip as a 12-year-old, I was like, oh, well, where do I see birds now? And so, I was lucky that the closest place to me was a really good little bushland reserve on the sort of lower north shore of Sydney called the Field of Mars. It's in East Ryde. And that was really where I cut my teeth birding. I would go there every weekend morning and afternoons after school sometimes. And I just have some really, vivid memories of like seeing my first rose robin or like powerful owl in there. And that, I lived in that area. We moved from 3 different houses, and they were all within like, a kilometre or so of the reserve. So over my time from like 12 years old till I was about 21. So I was able to go birding there all the time. And then, just sort of, expanding more and more and doing some of the outings with the Cumberland Bird Observers Club. That was a really good intro into like just birding locations in Sydney, as well as meeting other birders, even though they were all, 50 or 40 years older than me at a minimum, sort of thing. But that's how it is when you're a kid getting into birding, I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I recorded an episode recently with my good friend Jack, and he's a young birder. He's 18. He's just finished his exams, and it really is hard when you're that young and you've got quite a big set of limitations. And yeah, it can be tricky, but then again, you've got so much to explore, and so much to see. So that's another thing. And so I want to touch on your BirdLife work, because you work for BirdLife Australia. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I've been working for them as a casual basically for since June 2020. Yeah, I get confused with the years. Basically, I had some guiding work, and then that sort of obviously took a downturn with the pandemic, and I got hired to work as one of the staff, basically working on a release of Regent Honeyeaters, of captive Regent Honeyeaters in the Hunter Valley. So they did a release in 2020 in June in the Lower Hunter. And so, my job was sort of just going out there and looking at these birds each day for a couple of months kind of thing. So it was a really awesome gig. And then it sort of just, snowballed into more different conservation roles here and there with BirdLife, just doing different projects. And now it's sort of progressed into a second Regent Honeyeater captive release, which we're just sort of coming to the tail end, so to speak, of now, where we released 58 birds in conjunction with Taronga Zoo and a whole other bunch of stakeholders back in mid-October. So we're just sort of up to about 11, 12 weeks post-release now.
Yeah. Wow. That's fantastic. That's, and it's really important work as well, because like, as you say, the Regent Honeyeater, wow, that's like a dream bird for so many Australian birders and indeed international birders.
Absolutely.
Oh.
I mean, I pinch myself sometimes that it's like, you can go out and just look at Regent Honeyeaters each day. And we've been fortunate in that this release, there's been quite a lot of wild birds at the same spot where they've been released, and we've had wild birds with nests with successful chicks. So it's been a pretty good season as far as Regent Honeyeaters go. Like, yeah, they're obviously critically endangered. Estimates, it's rough, but it's 200 to 400 is the sort of general estimate. But so that means it could be as low as 200, but we just don't really know, because they're just not so much nomadic, but they're just always moving. They're sort of always on the move until the breeding season, really, when the conditions are right and they find somewhere that's good for them. And that's when we almost sort of, we can go 6 months or more of a year and not really record any regents anywhere. And then they all sort of, a bunch will show up just somewhere, and, then more will turn up. And it's an amazing bird. It just keeps me up at night sort of thinking about like what they do, where they go, why they do what they do, and, how they'll fare going forward. So yeah, being able to do this work that is having a positive impact, I think. So yeah, it's been very rewarding, to go from, work that, you get to go enjoy birding overseas or whatever, but this is sort of has more of an impact, I think, and it's rewarding work.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, as you mentioned, it's been a successful season. So is the population slowly increasing again for the regents, or?
It's a bit too soon to say, really. Probably not. They're probably at best stable, but they're more likely in decline, which is why we have to do these captive releases. I think the sort of, and I don't want to say the wrong thing here, but I think the general sort of thought is that the population, each regent pair in the wild needs to fledge at least 2 chicks every season, and we need to release up to 100 captive birds a year for the population not to decline further. So they're pretty high odds, they're pretty low odds, I guess. But this release has actually been very different from previous releases. So they used to do releases down in Victoria in the Chiltern Mount Pilot area, and they were all typically winter releases. Whereas this is the first release we've ever done in the breeding season. Yeah, which, seems odd. You'd think, release them in winter, release them when they're breeding, obviously, but it's just sort of not how how a lot of the flower works. The mugger ironbark has always been the sort of priority down in Victoria where they've done the releases. But this spring release, it's just coincided with a really good flowering event in the Lower Hunter Valley. And within a week of, captive birds who have never nested before and lived in, captivity for 1 or 2 years, within a week of being released, they're already building nests. So yeah, it was just super awesome. It was awesome to see that, these birds will actually do their thing, and they'll do their thing successfully if they're released in the right place at the right time, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And I guess you work in conjunction with Dean as well, or?
Yeah, Dean's my boss kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, it was actually fortunate that he was able to come up here about a month or 2 ago now from Victoria, because obviously he hadn't been able to leave the state for the release, which obviously was a big bummer, because it would have been great for him to be there, seeing as this is sort of his baby in a way. This is kind of his project. But he was able to come up, and we were able to band a couple of regents, as well as put satellite transmitters on 2 captive birds, which is pretty groundbreaking, really.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I should have said, but what's usually the case is that with the captive release, a proportion of the birds that we release have radio transmitters on them. So those are birds, you can track those birds with an antenna and a receiver. But this is really like new for a passerine almost anywhere, to put a satellite transmitter on them, because they have to be so small and accurate enough, obviously. So it was pretty awesome that we got to put 2 on 2 birds, and now they're sending us data, just to the computer each day of where they are. Which, I don't I don't actually think has been done anywhere in Australia, and possibly even in the world. They do it on, shorebirds and larger birds a fair bit, but to put them on a small passerine is pretty new.
Yeah, that is groundbreaking. That's
Mm.
really cool, and because with, like you mentioned, to have a receiver and to go out with a receiver, that can, I imagine, it can be a little bit impractical.
Mm.
But
Yeah, it is. It is. It has its quirks, and it has its, it takes a while to sort of get used to doing it and to get competent at it as well. But yeah, it has its limitations. You can only get a signal on a bird if it's sort of in the right direction. There's not too many objects in front of it, and you're not too far away. A lot of what we do is going to like high points or like hills and lookouts and mountains, and then you can actually scan for quite a few birds, and you can get signal for a bird with a transmitter on it from up to 20 kilometers away if you're high enough, which is really good. But once you're on the ground, you have to get quite close generally to get a good signal on these things. So
yeah. Whereas with the satellite, it's like anywhere you get the data coming in, rolling in.
yeah, that's it. And it'll be super interesting when these birds, because these satellite birds, we've been able to see them fairly frequently since they were banded or since they were tagged. But once we lose track of them, it'll be awesome to see where they do go. Because they could take us somewhere that we just never thought of, somewhere being the Regents would like. So yeah, it'll be awesome to see what
Absolutely.
happens with it.
Yeah. We'll have to have a follow-up episode at some point to check in. So
Absolutely.
I wanted to shift from that. So how does that work compare to your guiding work? Because they're completely different worlds. One is a commercial sphere, and the other is purely scientific and conservation. So how do you juggle those? How does it compare with your guiding work?
Yeah, well, it is. It is very different. The conservation stuff and bird life stuff. Yeah, you're generally working alone or in small parties, and you have a fairly specific sort of goal in mind or project. But I mean, guiding for me has always just been a way to go birding. And go overseas and go to great places and show people birds. So yeah, they're two different worlds, definitely. But a lot of it just comes down to being in the field and knowing your birds, and just every day you're out in the field, I find is practice. You just you hear a call that you'd never heard before from a certain species, and just like you just pick up new things every time you're out there. So I think they go hand in hand to a degree. Like the more you're out in the field, the better theoretically a guide you can be. Obviously, a bit different not being able to go anywhere overseas or any new places for a little while. But yeah, that'll come back in time. Yeah.
No, yeah, for sure. The pandemic's changed so much, hasn't it? But I was wondering, I'm interested in asking you this. Do you bird differently when you're guiding, or do you bird the same way as when you're alone?
Yeah, it's sort of, you definitely have to obviously be birding with the intent of finding things for people.
Right.
Most of my birding I'm not, well, yeah, I'll target certain species that I want to see from time to time, but typically I'm just going out and seeing what I see or hear. Whereas obviously when you've got a group with you, while it may not always be the case, the sort of idea is that people want to see as much as they can, so the idea is to try and, it's a bit like going for target after target sometimes, which is, it can get a little bit draining, but it's also like you get to see a lot of great birds. So it's different in that sense. But yeah, it's really, I still go out birding the same way. I don't think I changed too much of my behavior. It's a matter of, for me especially, like I really like to know the calls. I like to have a good knowledge of the calls from somewhere I go, because most of my birding I think is done by ear. I just really focus on what you can hear, and I feel like that's the best way to get a good idea of what's around you. Obviously you have to spot the birds so people can see them, but yeah, having a good knowledge of calls I think is really key to being just a good birder, or accomplished birder, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And so do you, like, because we're all different, even though we're all birders, we all have different kind of, emotions and reactions to things. Do you sometimes feel quite pressured when you're guiding to find a particular bird, or not really?
Yeah, it can be, certainly. It depends on the situation and the clientele, especially. I'm fortunate that the company that I work for is, there's a bit of a ranking, or you get different expectations and from different companies that do bird tours, because there's a lot out there. There's a lot of competition. But there are definitely companies that cater for the more hardcore sort of just want to tick, 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 see all the best things, not too fussed about where they stay or what they eat. And then you've got the lower end of that, where people would rather stay at a nice hotel and, see some things, see most things, but they're not too worried if they miss all the main targets. So Victor Emanuel tends to cater for sort of that end, or sort of mid to that end. So a lot of the clientele, they're fairly laid back. They're not too intense, which makes it more enjoyable, I think, in the end for everyone, because inevitably you do see good birds, and you still want to target the good birds, but at the end of the day that everyone's not going to be completely bummed out if you do unfortunately miss a certain thing. So that's what I quite like about working for Victor Emanuel Nature Tours, especially. But then again, you'll get, every client's different, and you'll get clients that will be asking you every 10 minutes, like, when are we going to see this thing? When are we going to see it? All in good time. But yeah, you do feel the pressure from time to time.
I can imagine that. I can imagine, yeah, because like it is different. Like we were talking at the beginning, solo birding, where you just have your own company and you're enjoying the peace and quiet in a way. But of course, when you're with other people, we are also saying, you've got more pairs of eyes, and so there are different advantages and disadvantages to talk about.
Yeah.
But so to go back to when you started being a birding guide, what prompted you? Why did you want to become a bird guide?
Well, I sort of went to uni and I did an ecology degree, like a bachelor, not really knowing sort of what I wanted to do for work. I knew I wanted to do something, conservation based, ideally never have to work in an office. So that was sort of my mindset. And then a friend of mine got into guiding just as a thing. He sort of just contacted a guiding company and was like, I'd like to work for you. And they actually took him up on it. And I was just like, oh, that's a thing that you can do. You can just get paid to go show people birds. So that was really just for me. It was like, oh, well, I don't really want to do anything else now. So yeah, it was a matter of trying to follow that. And obviously not obviously, but like with a lot of jobs, it's often who sometimes more than what So I was fortunate that like I had friends and people I knew who were also into guiding, and one friend in particular who sort of set me up with the company that I work for now. So yeah, but I've worked for a few smaller companies in the lead up to that, I suppose, and I'm always open to doing sort of small tours or like day trips for other companies. But yeah, it's sort of like once you get hired as a guide for a particular company, you're that's who you work for. But yeah, that was it was a bit of a revelation for me when I realized that was actually that was a job prospect. And while it may not be the best paid job or the most secure sort of lifestyle, you don't spend a lot of time in one place, and it's not really conducive to having relationships and things like that always. I just figured, while I'm young, while I can do it, while I want to see birds, just go for it. So yeah.
I want to very briefly touch on this. You mentioned like relationships and how birding and work as well, conservation works, stuff like that can have a strain on relationships or make it difficult. Have you got any tips out there for anyone listening who's kind of having troubles with balancing birding and family life?
Look, I'm probably not the best person to ask. Yeah, no, I think, I've been in relationships while I've been a guide and while I've gone on overseas trips for many weeks at a time. And I had a very understanding partner at the time, but yeah, it's sort of, the relationship in that case was, broke down for other reasons. But I do think it's really a matter of, you have to find someone who is independent in their own right and, respects what you want to do, but it's so much of a give and take, and I think those people who are able to work as a guide or work away for long periods and also maintain a stable relationship are very fortunate, and they must work hard behind the scenes. But yeah, I don't know if I'd have any tips, so to speak, but yeah, it's just really, I think, finding the right person and then making it work to a degree. And if that person also likes going on birding trips overseas, and that's just a plus. So
yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. And it's and birding is what would you say, it's unique among hobbies that you have to spend a lot of time being absent. Do you see what I mean? Where you're doing your own thing somewhere else on your own, So I suppose that's why sometimes it can also complicate things, But we don't need to dwell on that. It's just I reckon it's quite interesting because it's good to talk about it as birders, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, your lifestyle, I think, will change, with time. Like maybe in another 10 or 20 years, I would rather just be in one place, and that would be more conducive to having a stable relationship. But yeah, I just sort of, at least of the last year, I've just really sort of taken stock of the fact that it's sort of like, with the pandemic and everything, I guess, as well, it's really, I think you just got to do what you want to do to a degree and what makes you happy. And, that means, being single for a time being or for however long you want, and you still, you get a lot of enjoyment out of your life. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think there's a lot of pressure to be in a relationship, but I don't think it's necessarily always the right thing for people. Just, yeah, and when it's right, I think.
I was getting to the question, what makes a good birder, really?
Right, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a good question because, I mean, you could just say anyone's a good birder, but, you see people and it's like, oh, you're a good birder or you're a gun birder, like people who just go out and they find things, find good birds. They just have a knack for it, I think, and maybe that doesn't necessarily make them a good birder. Maybe there's a bit of luck there. I mean, there's always a bit of luck to birding, but I think there is a lot to knowing, where you're at, where you're going, what might be there, and obviously having a good knowledge of the birds themselves. So I think at the end of the day, it's just about experience with everything, isn't it? It's sort of just like the more you're out there and the more you enjoy it, the more you're going to pick up, I think, just little things that, inevitably build into a really good knowledge of, an area or birds in general, or, conditions, especially like something like in Australia, sort of just like, because Australia, I find, is such a changing landscape all the time, or it's the seasons. Well, maybe the seasons are not so pronounced, but the conditions are so variable. I find it sort of like, I feel like there's people who can really, they have a good knack for that. They have a good knack for sort of thinking, oh, well, it's probably good out here now, or, people are seeing things, so I'll go out there, and then end up finding really good things just because it's like, they have an awareness. So I think that's something that definitely contributes to being a good birder. But I think another aspect of being a good birder is being a good birder to others, and encouraging others, not putting other people down, because birding can competitive at times and very egotistic. I think there's a lot of people in birding who just sort of, they're just very straight or narrow-minded. But I think there can be so much gained from encouraging other people and birding as a community, sort of fostering that kind of birding community and just making it a good place for everyone. Because at the end of the day, that just means there's more people out there looking and they're going to see more things, and that's a win-win for everyone. So, yeah, I think that's part of it too, definitely.
Yeah, that's a really good, that's a good point about, the whole community aspect as well, because we're not, it is a community, and like you said, there's lots of levels, and it's to encourage to encourage everyone between these levels is also a good part of what would you say, fostering the passion.
Yeah, for sure. Just sharing it with people, really, and then by sharing it in a respectful way, I think that will just encourage other people more, because especially I think there's a lot to like birding when you're young, and also probably, and not that I can really speak about it, but birding from the perspective of like being a woman or gay or whatever, like it's a lot harder for people to get into birding and to find that sort of birding community when you're on the sort of the outside, I guess, when birding is considered such a male or an elderly male dominated sort of sphere. So yeah, encouraging younger people and people from different sort of communities, I think is also really valuable to just diversifying birding.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and also to go back to the kind of technical terms of being a good birder. Just yesterday, I recorded another episode with Harry Nyström, who's from Finland, and he also developed an interest in entomology, because he noticed that, I know everything about the birds, but I don't know anything about anything else, the plants, the insects. And so I guess being a good birder also means encompassing knowledge about the whole environment and the habitat as well. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think that's one of the best things about birding and all sort of nature focused things. But by becoming focused on birds, for example, you can't ignore the habitat or what they're doing. And I think it provides a great excuse to just get more in touch with like what's going on when you're in the field. I mean, a great example of that, I guess for me at least, would be mistletoe. And it was through a BirdLife project where we're propagating or actually planting mistletoe. Specifically, this one's needle leaf mistletoe in River Casuarinas or she oaks in the Kapiti Valley. But everyone knows like the mistletoe bird, and that like painted honeyeaters also like to consume mistletoe fruit. But I just, until I sort of started thinking about it and doing this sort of work, I never really appreciated just how diverse mistletoe was as a plant. So there's, I think there's about 80 species of mistletoe in Australia, and just the life cycle and everything. So something like that, where it's like, most people, have no reason to notice mistletoe or to know anything about it, but by being interested in birds and, enjoying watching birds and what they're doing, like you can find other really cool aspects of nature that you just never would have been, exposed to necessarily, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's exactly right. Because birds are part of such a complex system that you have to, you're almost obligated to look at the other things like the plants and their diet, and the weather as well. It's such an amazing kind of thing, and birds are the entry gate to that, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, I think birding is just a way of being like a part of the world in a way, because it really just makes you, like I'm obsessed with the weather and like where it's rained and like what the sea surface temperature is and the winds and things like that. But like most people wouldn't care about, but it's just like because birds are also a part of that, and it's just and obviously then it plays into like conservation and, having a real, care for, conservation issues and actually conserving places, because it's like these aren't just patches of bush in the middle of nowhere. These are places, where birds live and interact with all different plants and animals and species. So it's like so much more when you actually have a deeper understanding or a deeper sort of knowledge of, birding and nature, I guess, in general.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. And so this whole thing also leads us to the next kind of topic, which I'm excited to discuss with you, which is bird photography. So, are you a bird photographer? And if so, how do you juggle the photography with the birding?
Yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't call myself a bird photographer. I take photos of birds, but it's the same with birding, I guess. It's like there's so many levels to it, and there's just solely photographers who, it's an art for them and they take amazing photos, and that's their passion, and that's great. But photography, for me at least, with birds is more just a way of documenting, special occasions, and not even special occasions, just having an actual record of something that, exists in your mind, but it is different when you have an actual sort of tangible memory in a way. And I guess I got into photography a little bit more with the guiding, because it sort of goes part and part a little bit. You kind of need to take photos of what you're seeing to sell trips, but it's been a good entry into just sort of getting a little bit better at it. And I don't take my camera out with me when I'm birding all that often, honestly. But I'll take it out for specific things. Yeah, I mean, it depends what I'm doing. But it's typically not far away, but it's typically not on me. I'll get it out more, I think, if I'm going to a new place maybe, or like I know there's something here that I want to get photos of. I think another thing and because it's a Sony RX10, which is sort of more of a bridge camera. It's sort of like the high end of the bridge cameras. It's a great little camera. I bought it because a bunch of other people I knew on tours and other birders used them, because and the thing with guiding, at least as well, is it's just the actual sort of ease of carrying around a DSLR with a 400mm lens or something like that is just, I find it very impractical when you're, getting in and out of vehicles or traveling on airplanes, and just that side of it. Like, obviously people make it work. But for me, it was more, I'd rather just have something that's compact, but also lets me have a good record of what's happened. So yeah, I guess that's photography when birding for me. And I think another thing is just with, not so much for taking photos of birds, obviously, but, well, yes and no, but like just how good, phone cameras are. Like, I would do digiscoping a lot before I had a camera, or bin scoping, and getting like good at taking photos through your bins. And you can get some surprisingly good photos, honestly, like from time to time. So I think always having your phone on you, like we all do, you can always document something to a degree. So yeah, I think photography is a way of, just, people getting better and better photos of things. And yeah.
For sure, yeah. I'm along the same train of thought, actually. I do always like to always have my camera on me, just if there's a rare bird. That's the only reason, really.
Safe idea.
Yeah, and so it's like, and also like to keep a visual record of what I see on the day, because and it's partly because I'm quite a creatively visual person. So looking at eBird lists, I like there to be photos on there as well.
Always better with photos.
Yeah, so that's another thing. And actually, we can talk about eBird a bit. Do you like eBird? Do you use eBird a lot?
I kind of use eBird every hour of the day. It's become an obsession. Yeah, like it really appeals to me, that list keeping and numbers and recording what you see. So yeah, and obviously the fact that it contributes to a really important scientific database. I just think there's no reason not to use it almost. So yes, I'm definitely an eBird fanatic.
Excellent. That's how I like it. Good job. So we're going to have to wrap up soon. Unfortunately, the time's just flown by. So I have a couple of closing questions. So kind of quick fire round sort of thing. So Max Breckenridge, what's your favorite bird?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm obliged to say Regent Honeyeaters, and I do love them. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they're not. Yeah, some people think they're ugly, the sort of warty face, but I think it gives them a lot of character. And seeing a Regent Honeyeater in flight, or like when you get the whole back of it in good light, it's just like, there's nothing else. Like every time I see that, it's like, oh. But I think probably a bird I tend to say is my favorite bird would be spotted quail thrush.
Oh, nice, yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of a bird that I feel like I have a bit of affinity with. Like, I just love the habitat you find them in generally, like that grassy woodland on a slope with some rocks. And I feel like it was a bird that like I found like on my grandparents' property when I was a kid. Like they've got this hill on their property, and I remember just walking up there one day and flushing this thing, and then, inevitably ending up getting a really good view of this male just walking around through the grass tussocks. And I was like, wow, this is awesome, as far as a bird can be. Like all quail thrush are great, but I think spotted quail thrush for me is, it's a good bird. It's got a great call as well. Yeah.
Oh, that's a great choice, actually. Yeah, I love those. I love all those kind of. Oh, the whole group of quail thrushes, as you say, is fantastic because they're quite unique, I think. I was just going to say that at the moment I'm a huge fan of the channel-billed cuckoos. Man, they're so awesome. They're so cool. Like being in Melbourne, a couple would come every year, but it's not common at all down there. But now I'm up in the Coffs Coast, it's like I can hear and it's like it's like a dinosaur. When you see them flying, it's like seeing a pterodactyl flying, and especially when they're calling, it's like mind blown. I saw one the other day. I couldn't take, like, talking about photography and just birding. I couldn't take my eyes off it. I wanted to take a picture, but I just couldn't. I kept looking at it. Just amazing.
Yeah. That's when I think it's a good bird. It's like when you forget to get your camera out, you're just enjoying the moment. And I think sometimes even I've been guilty of that, of like you see a good bird and you want to get a photo straight away, but you sometimes sort of regret doing that sometimes, I find, because it's sort of nice to savor the moment. I mean, you obviously want to get a good photo too, but yeah, I think channel bills are just like one of those, just like a great, like a sign of summer, and just the fact that they're just so obnoxious. I just love that, and just they're always one of those birds where you get non-birders saying, "What is this bird? Like makes this horrible noise in the middle of the night."
Absolutely, yeah. Legendary bird, legendary. Oh, and there's so many. Like what I have found is that my favorite birds kind of change every time I see a new bird I like. Like the most recent one, channel-billed cuckoo, I saw it just up the road, and it was just magical. And it evolves like that. But so for the final question, do you have a dream destination that you'd love to go birding? You would love to go to?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, isn't there? I think for me, somewhere that's just been, I've been lucky enough to go to India 3 or 4 times now, but I've never managed to get to the Himalayas yet. And I think that just mountainous sort of upland forest plateau, rhododendron valleys and like little monasteries, and it just, that's somewhere that's just has such a pull on me, just the fact that I haven't been there yet as well. It's just somewhere that I'm just desperate to go. Like, maybe it won't be as good in reality, but I'm sure it will be. It's just, yeah, that's probably my dream destination, at least at the moment. Yeah.
Beautiful, yeah, fantastic. Oh, the Himalayan foothills are also, funnily enough, one of my dream destinations. I think that's where you can find the ibis bill, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, there's so many like just stellar birds. Yeah, like the monals and ibis bill, and then you've got like Ward's trogon, also in Bhutan, and just the diversity. Like it's such a diverse region. Like I love looking at that bit on eBird with the species maps, or the diversity, and seeing like the areas just in bright red, and the Himalayas is just like a bright red strip, going into sort of Bhutan, Yunnan, Sichuan sort of thing in China, and it's just like, it's got to be a hot spot for birding. You just got to get there and soak it up, I think.
No, for sure, absolutely, yeah. Well, that's a fantastic note to end on. So thanks so much, Max, for coming on the show. It's been an absolute joy.
No, thank you. It's been great. No, all the best.
All the best. Thanks so much, and hope to see you in the field sometime. Now I'm up in New South Wales. Could organise something if you want.
You're always welcome out in Coonabarabran.
Righto, I'll quote you on that.
Go for it.
Right,
all right, mate.
Thanks, Max. See ya.
Cheers. See ya.
You've been listening to the Birding Today podcast. New episodes are released every Friday, and if you'd like to get in touch, just write an email to birdingtoday@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.